Helping a creature in need can be a tricky situation. Sometimes people find animals who are so hurt, or in such danger, that there's simply no time to try to get help from animal rescue experts. In times like these, there's almost no choice but to improvise to save the creature's life.
Before we begin, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe to our channel, click the notification bell to be inspired by these heartwarming stories every day.
That seemed to be the case when Crystal Kelley, a resident of Indianapolis, Indiana, noticed an unfortunate creature suffering in her yard. What she did in her desperate attempt to keep him alive may have seemed odd, but it was a stroke of genius. During one particularly snowy day in January 2016, Indianapolis, Indiana resident Crystal Kelley sent her little Yorkshire terrier, Lily, out into the backyard of her home to play and explore. While it began like any ordinary winter day for the pair, it would soon take an unexpected turn. Many dogs love playing in the snow because it's such a unique environment for them to enjoy, but it wasn't long before Crystal noticed something distracting Lily, even by the standards of such easily distracted animals. It was a bird, and the poor creature didn't seem well. But naturally, Crystal's most immediate concern was the health and safety of her and her furry friend. "Lily, you leave the birdie alone," she said firmly. "You need to come inside." Yet it soon became clear that the bird was in more immediate trouble. The poor creature was covered in ice so thoroughly that he was lying completely motionless, his wings frozen solid to his body. Crystal had to think quickly to help the bird as well as she could. Luckily, she was very crafty and was prepared to use all her resources to help the little creature. She put him in a bowl and covered him with a blanket as she developed her plan. Crystal had little expertise to speak of when it came to animal rescues, but she was determined to do whatever she could to help revive the suffering bird before it was too late. To that end, she brought out a hairdryer and decided to warm the little guy up. There was no question that Crystal's idea in that challenging moment was an unusual one, but she knew she had to try her best to do whatever she could to save the poor creature's life. If Crystal had simply done nothing, as many other folks in the same boat likely would have, that very well may have spelled the end of the line for the bird anyway. She could indeed have ignored the bird and let her dog continue to play. But with a life on the line, it must have seemed like there was nothing to lose. Little by little, with the way that the frozen bird was literally defrosting, it seemed that there might have been some hope for him yet, but it would take some time before she'd know whether he'd be okay. At the same time, with the bird and the bowl just outside the back door of her house, and the hairdryer plugged in, Crystal had to be cautious as she thawed the injured bird. She didn't want it to end up like some other frozen critters out there. Initially, it didn't seem to be working. "I didn't put the blow dryer on high and warm him up too quickly," she clarified in the description for the YouTube video she posted. With a little patience, and a low heat setting, something special happened. As the ice gradually melted, the bird started showing definitive signs of life. In time, he even started fidgeting and trying to maneuver his body towards the source of the much-needed warmth. More and more, the bird started to display signs of improvement, and 2 hours after Crystal had initially started trying to warm him up, he finally started moving his wings, a sure sign that he still had some fight left in him. Amazingly, the bird began stretching his legs, then before she knew it, he was happily hopping around the ground. It was as if he couldn't handle his excitement after Crystal gave him a new lease on life. Yet one crucial question still remained: would the bird be able to fly again? It was great that he was still alive, but without the power of flight, he'd hardly be able to live the kind of life that his species was supposed to. Sure enough, it only took a few hops before the bird took flight, soaring high above the trees before Crystal and Lily's very eyes. He may not have stayed to say, "Thank you," but surely he must have been grateful. Crystal was surprised to see that her unusual life-saving method worked, and his departure happened so quickly that she could hardly even process it. "Oh my gosh," she exclaimed as the bird darted away. She could hardly believe how fast he flew. Crystal certainly deserves a great deal of credit for her quick, clever thinking when it came to saving that bird's life. Had it not been for her, the little guy would have been a goner. However, Crystal also credits Lily with leading her to the discovery in the first place. "My Yorkie helped me find this bird. As you can see, she was very sweet to it," she wrote on Facebook. Yorkies are the best.
If you enjoyed this story, then wait for our next story starting in 10 seconds.
While all animals should be protected, it's safe to say that some populations are healthier than others. In fact, there are certain animals, like the hippos in Colombia, who have overpopulated the regions in which they live. That said, there are other species that need all the help they can get. These animals are constantly in danger, and that danger is posed by both other animals and, all too often, by human beings. When customs authorities in China spotted a strange shipping container at a port one day, they were suspicious. What they didn't know was that when they opened the container, everything was going to get a lot more serious. Customs officials in Shenzhen, China, weren't sure what to expect when they flagged a suspicious cargo container that had arrived in Yantian District's port. It arrived through unconventional channels without the right paperwork, which was already enough to raise a red flag. They were told that the shipping container was empty, but the officers from the Dapeng Customs anti-smuggling branch didn't believe that for 1 minute. They knew they had to inspect the inside. They broke the lock on the shipping container and immediately noticed that it was filled to the brim with blue and red striped bags. They sliced open one of the bags and discovered it was full of coal. But if coal was all these bags were carrying, why try to keep it a secret? The investigating officers decided to look a little bit more closely at these bags. They pulled out each sack, and before they were even halfway through they noticed an unforgettable smell, the sickly odor of decay. Before the investigators proceeded any further, they needed to consider their own health and safety. So, they called in quarantine officers to supervise as they unpacked the rest of the sacks. What they found left them feeling sick to their stomachs. The contents of the bags were mind-boggling, and the investigators were quick to reveal their findings to the public. Our preliminary inspection determined they were pangolin scales, the officials reported. In total, the bags contained 13.1 tons of pangolin scales. This wasn't just a huge amount of scales, in fact, it was the largest bust of illegal pangolin byproducts ever made by Chinese officials. Specialists speculated that these scales had to come from a whopping 30,000 pangolins. Investigators were desperate to catch the people responsible for this crime and to stop them before they could cause any further damage. Shanghai's pangolins, which look similar to armadillos, are the most trafficked animal in the world. Because of poaching and smuggling, this creature is perilously endangered, and it was a bad sign that so many of their scales were discovered in these shipping crates. Pangolins tend to curl up into little balls when they feel scared or threatened. This makes them all too easy for traffickers to scoop up and sell. So, why are they frequently smuggled? And why are their scales so valuable? It may be because of the role they play in traditional Chinese medicine. Even though there is no scientific evidence to support it, many people in China believe that ingesting pangolin scales can cure a number of illnesses, like asthma, arthritis, and even cancer. It's considered a wonder drug. Some people even believe that eating pangolin meat can have a healing effect, though in reality, this illegal act can earn them 10 years in prison. The pangolin has been granted protection by the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, but this doesn't stop criminals from rapidly depleting their numbers. Unfortunately, investigators in the case of these shipping crates didn't have much to work with when it came to identifying the criminals responsible. The only information available was the name, Sha times Hua, written on the shipping forms. They were worried they wouldn't find any other leads. To get more help on the case, the investigators called in a team that was dedicated to shutting down smuggling operations. The experts identified the pangolin scales as being African in origin. Using the name on the shipment and this location, they were able to narrow down the list of potential suspects. The initial list of suspects contained dozens of potential leads for investigators, and they were vigilant in researching each one. In the process, they ruled out many possible suspects, and they eventually arrested 2 men named He and Li. Li was a known smuggler who had successfully evaded capture for years. He completely denied having anything to do with the scales, even when photographs of them were found on his cell phone. He chalked this up to having bought his phone secondhand. At first, the investigators thought that Lee had them in between a rock and a hard place. If he could prove that the phone was purchased secondhand, then there was no way they could hold him in custody without more evidence of his involvement in the crime. However, for someone so experienced at committing crimes, Lee had made one serious mistake. In a photograph of the scales, the photographer had also accidentally captured an image of his foot. His foot had an identifying trait, too, a mole. When investigators compared the feet, and realized the similarity, it was all the proof they needed of his involvement. Investigators discovered that Lee and he had been partners for quite some time. The two had made an astounding $758,000 in business dealings together. Lee was responsible for shipping the product, while he was responsible for seeing that it was sold. After they were arrested, the criminals and their proceedings were reported to the General Administration of Customs. While Lee and he were definitely collaborating with each other, there was no way of knowing how many other illegal operators were involved. Serious efforts may be underway to protect the species, but it's still not enough. The International Fund for Animal Welfare made a statement that read, "More needs to be done so we don't see pangolins go extinct within our lifetime. Here's hoping that change is made sooner than later." This impressive sting might have put a major dent in illegal pangolin smuggling operations, but there was still a lot of work to be done. People need to come together to make sure that the pangolin sticks around.